So today's session uh, is on what resistance uh, can teach you, what you can learn from resistance. Um, there are a lot of um, ways in which we experience resistance in our lives. Um, Probably the most common one, I think, for a lot of us is procrastination, right? Um, we label procrastination and resistance often in really harsh, judgmental terms. We call ourselves or other people lazy. Um, the avoidance feels like weakness, um, self sabotaging. And for sure, self sabotage is in some ways the way it manifests itself, right? But uh, I taught high school for 25 years, and there were plenty of kids that called themselves or their parents called them or other teachers called them lazy. But I only met probably like one or two kids who were legitimately lazy in those 25 years out of thousands. Uh, there was something behind it. There's something actually going on that created resistance, that created avoidance. Um, and usually there's some kind of emotion that we don't want to experience that we're avoiding. And so, you know, laziness is a word that I think for most of us should be banished from our vocabulary. Um, and the resistance that you're experiencing, the thing that you're fighting in some ways, right? Uh, that's what resistance feels like. It feels like a conflict going on. Um, what if we could actually switch that paradigm and you could realize that it's actually on your side? It's got something to teach you. The resistance has something to teach you, something important, right? And that's an important paradigm shift, right? Because otherwise, like what we do is we spend countless cycles um, resisting, procrastinating, avoiding, and beating ourselves up over it. Other people probably beating us up over it. And instead, if we can be curious about the nature of the resistance and understand that it's an ally trying to teach us something, then it can actually lead to growth, right? As well as a breakthrough in whatever you've been resisting. So, uh, let's get into that, right? Um, it If we don't switch this paradigm, if we stay on the same path, it's exhausting, right? I mean, how many of you, um, find yourselves exhausted from this constant battle of trying to motivate yourself and trying to get stuff done when you're procrastinating or avoiding or resisting in some way, shape, or form? It's exhausting physically and mentally, right? It's no way to live. You're kind of in battle with yourself, pushing against yourself. Um, but I think about it like some of the martial arts. I studied and taught a variety of martial arts for over 20 years, and we tended to not meet force with force, but rather to meet it, go with it, and redirect it. And that's the way I think about this. That whatever resistance you're facing, rather than trying to hit it head on, overcome it with brute force, willpower, right? I'm not weak, right? I can overpower this. Instead, meet it, go with it, learn from it, and then redirect it, right? That's what we're after. Um, so so There are, I think, at least three major forms of resistance, right? And here's what's underlying each of them. So this will help start to shift that paradigm. And by the way, if at any point there's something confusing, there's something you want to push back on, there's a question you have, pop it in the chat. I love an active chat, and I'd love to have this feel as much like a conversation and exploration together as we can. So the first type is fear resistance. Incredibly common, particularly with procrastination. Um, and it's as if what's happening inside of you is the risk involved is so big that I can't risk failing, right? That's subconsciously what's kind of going on. Could be fear of failure, right? That, God, if I fail, it would just be heartbreaking, shameful. I'd feel guilty. I'd be embarrassed. It would undermine my whole self worth, my vision for myself, whatever it is. That fear of failure causes you to resist, and the way it looks like is procrastination and avoidance, and it's a form of self-sabotage, right? Because you're choosing to fail by not doing the thing or not leaving yourself enough time to do it well. So now I have an excuse. I failed because I didn't try, or I failed because I didn't have enough time, right? It's not an accurate evaluation of what you're capable of. You avoid that failure. And in some cases, it's fear of success. And I don't know how many of you have ever had that experience of fear of success, but it's much more common than you would think. I've had it a lot. And it can be about being afraid that if you succeed, you won't stay there, right? You kind of get to the top, and then what if I fall off the other side, right? What if it's momentary? That's going to feel really bad, right? And disappointing that I couldn't sustain the success. So why bother even trying to get there? Uh, it also can be about, what if I get there? What if I'm successful? And that is intimidating to other people. People are jealous. They criticize me, try to pull me apart, tear me down. So don't go there, because I don't want to deal with that. I don't want to deal with that, like, you know, disruption to my nervous system from people criticizing me and being jealous and trying to tear me down, right? They'd rather fade into the woodwork and be invisible, right? Um, and and if you can figure out what kind of fear is actually going on there, then fear we can deal with, like consciously fear we can deal with. That requires courage. Courage, right, demands that there be fear, right? There's no courage without the fear. So, but you can take the fear with you. You can pick it up and carry it with you and learn from it, right? And figure out, like, what's underlying this? Is there some kind of insecurity that I have, right? Do I feel unprepared? Do I feel unqualified? Well, what can I do about that? Are there ways to reassure myself, or do I need to bolster some skills or get some, improved qualifications or something? Whatever it is, you can go after that. And if it's just fear of failure or success, you can acknowledge that and walk forward, take your baby steps and walk forward with the fear and do the thing, acknowledging that it is scary. But that's why we have courage. And you've done hard things before, and you'll do hard things again in the future, right? But there are ways to overcome that. But if it's just lingering in our subconscious and undermining us, that's where the problems lie, right? And where we end up procrastinating and avoiding constantly, right? So that's fear, resistance from fear. Next is values resistance. This is where whatever it is you're trying to do or supposed to do or feel like you have to do isn't what you really want or what you really need. It may be out of alignment with your core values and beliefs, right? It may be a question of integrity. It's about the direction, not you. It's about, I'm not actually committed to that. That doesn't feel like the right path, right? But sometimes we keep, engaging in this battle, trying to move in a certain direction, trying to do a certain thing. Maybe it's because we're trying to live up to other people's expectations, right? I have that a lot in coaching. People in their 20s, 30s, 40s, even 50s who wake up one day and realize, I'm really not happy and successful, or maybe I even am on paper successful, but something's out of alignment here. I've got resistance going on here around my path. And it's because they're not living their path. They're living someone else's path, someone else's idea of what they should do with their lives, how they should live their lives, who they should marry, or what kind of careers they should have. Then they realize, like, I've had this resistance going on the whole time. And it's the resistance is either blocking me from doing certain things, or it's blocking me from enjoying the success that I've had, right? There may be people here who've experienced that. And that's terrible, right? To wake up one day and you did everything you thought you were supposed to do. You went to the right schools, got the right job, got the promotion, got the, the increase in pay, and you're like, it's unsatisfying. Feels like this isn't right. This is not I'm following a map that someone else drew for me. This is not my map, right? So something's out of alignment. It could be very explicitly about values. I had that when I was a diplomat with the State Department, right? Great career. And I was working on the genocide in Bosnia and found that the policy was a massive uh, contradiction with my core values and what I believe the core values of the country were at the time. And I ended up quitting publicly as an act of protest and became an activist because that was a values resistance, right? Doing my job and staying a part of that organization, right? That administration was in direct contradiction with my core values, right? Couldn't sleep at night. So for my soul, I had to move on. Not easy, right? But it became probably the pivotal moment in my professional life, right? And for the best, right? So I know, what I'm talking about on this one. For a lot of people, the stakes aren't quite as high, but they can still be pretty high stakes, right? You wake up and you realize in your 30s or 40s or 50s that you're on the wrong path, uh, and it's out of alignment with who you really are and who you want to be and what your values are. Like, that's hard, right? That's part of one of the things I help people with. And then there's depletion resistance. A lot of us have experienced that and don't recognize it. And that's where, like, you got nothing left in the tank, physically, mentally, emotionally, some combination of the above. You've been burning the candle at both ends. You've been lacking clear boundaries work wise or in a relationship, right? You just, the withdrawals from the emotional bank account, your own relationships, your work emotional bank account, they just kept going and going and going, and there's nothing left in there anymore, right? Or there's not a lot. And so motivating yourself, staying focused, right, is causing you to resist, right? It's not laziness, it's exhaustion, right? And to be able to realize that, hopefully before you get to that point where, and I've been there. Last year, as some of you know, I went through a couple of health crises that came out of the blue. And there were times where in theory, I thought I'd recovered enough to be able to engage back in the work and in the way that I had been engaged before. And it was like, nope, well, I could do some things, but not others, in part just because it's like, I didn't have anything left in the tank. I needed to do some restorative work, right? To get to that place where I could. And then once I could do that, it was off to the races. But you got to listen to your body, listen to your mind, and what they're telling you about your capacity to do what you need to do, and whether you need to take a break, take a nap, take a vacation, go for a walk in the woods, listen to some music, whatever it is that you think will rejuvenate you, will restore you to some extent, will put some deposits back in the emotional or physical bank account, that you have uh, for energy. Do that, right? So that's a big one, the depletion resistance. Again, a lot of people don't realize that. And again, like, if you just keep trying to meet the resistance and overpower it, think about what that's going to happen when you're facing resistance based on depletion. Like, you keep pushing like that, you don't have the power, the energy to overcome that resistance, right? You're just going to deplete yourself more. It's going to get worse, right? But if you could instead go with it and say, oh, what is this teaching me? It's teaching me that I need to recharge my batteries. Okay, let's look at my sleep hygiene. Let's look at my schedule, boundaries that I have. Let's look at my time spent outdoors or in nature. Am I eating well? Am I getting enough water? Right? I mean, it's all these things. You start to redirect the resistance so that it can teach you something as you go. And then the resistance hopefully fades away. Right? So, so that's really, a great example of why it's important not to just try and meet the resistance with brute force, willpower, right? Again, these paradigms that we have that we think we're lazy and weak, well, the way to counter that is to be strong and have resolve, right? But most of the time, it's, almost all the time, it's not about that. So you're not going to make it better. You're going to make it worse, right? Um, let's take a pause for a second. First, if there's anybody who has any observations, reactions, does this make sense? Does it not? Anything, questions, whatever it is, situations, pop it in the chat. I'm sure somebody else will be like, oh my gosh, I was thinking that, or oh, I was wondering about that too, or that's me, right? Happens all the time. And then if you feel comfortable, maybe close your eyes again. And I want you to think about what's one thing that you keep avoiding that you think you should be doing? What's one thing that you've been avoiding that you think you should be doing? A lot of people around this time of year in the United States, it's taxes, doing your tax returns. That can be one thing. Um, but what's one thing, right? And then once you figure out what that one thing is that you're avoiding, if the resistance to doing that had a voice, what would it tell you? What would it say? Right? What's one thing you're avoiding that you should be doing, think you should be doing? And if the resistance to doing that had a voice, what would it tell you? What would it say? And then once you hear what the voice would say, you think it's trying to protect you from failure or from something that just doesn't fit, that's out of alignment? Or is it telling you that you need to rest and rejuvenate? What's it telling you? Beth says, yes, taxes hanging over my head. The voice tells me I can get an extension. Yeah, we're trying to get at, why does the voice want you to get an extension? What's going to change if you get an extension? What are you avoiding? Is it fear? Right? For a lot of us, the avoiding taxes is about fear, right? It's fear that you'll get it wrong, fear that you're going to have to pay a lot of money. Well, the getting it wrong, you want as much time to work on it as you can so that you can be careful and not make mistakes. So procrastinating doesn't help. In terms of like, you might have to owe a lot of money. You might be getting a refund. That's possible. In which case you're delaying the refund and delaying the interest on the refund. If you are going to owe money, which in some ways is a good thing, it means that you borrowed money in a way from the government for the past year without interest. So it's not a bad thing to owe the money. Hopefully, you've been setting it aside so you'll be able to pay your tax bill. But delaying is not going to change that fact, right? Procrastinating is not going to change that fact. You're still going to have to pay the money, and you're supposed to pay it when you file the extension. So delaying doesn't actually help you at all if you're going to owe money. In fact, the sooner you figure that out, the sooner you can come up with contingency plans for how to deal with that situation. So the fear you're trying to avoid that's underlying it with the taxes, delaying is not helping you, and it's making things harder. Sometimes if we can come to that realization, then we can start doing the thing. And then, as with any avoidance, I always like a timer. You can do anything for 5 minutes. Set a timer for 5 minutes. I'm going to sit down, I'm just going to look over the documents, look over the questionnaire from the accountant or whatever, and do 5 minutes. At the end of 5 minutes, if it's not like soul crushing, I'll do another 5 minutes or 10 minutes, set a timer again. And I'll just keep doing that. When I feel like I need to take a break, I'll take a break for 5 or 10 minutes, set the timer for that, come back, do a little bit more. Right? That can get you through a lot of procrastination, right? And avoidance. Beth says the reality is when I finally do my taxes, it doesn't take as long as I thought. Yeah, it never does. Uh, and it's not hard. It's just time consuming. Right. So instead, what you're doing is you're still going to spend the same amount of time on it, but you're causing yourself angst and guilt, maybe, by avoiding and putting it off. Well, you can actually do something about that. Do the taxes now. And then you alleviate yourself from the anxiety, the anticipation, and just do the thing. That's going to be the same. It'll probably be better now just because there won't be as much of a time crunch, right? Like again, we're trying to raise to the level of consciousness what's going on inside of us. Because that we can resolve most of the time. It's when it's living in our subconscious and we're just kind of agreeing to mindlessly act out the resistance, the procrastination, the avoidance, that we cause ourselves suffering, unnecessary suffering, sometimes for days or weeks or months, years in some cases. But if we can get at like what's really going on there, sometimes it's about making a big life decision, you know, that has real consequences, getting a divorce, quitting a job, right? Like I did. And we'll put it off for months or years, causing ourselves unnecessary angst, right? Figure out what the source of the resistance is, and then try to understand that better, and then problem solve that, whatever's underlying it, right? And sometimes you need some help and support with that. That's why I have a business, right? You get a life coach, and they can help you figure that out, right? And work through that. Um, but I got a client right now. We're doing a lot of work around that. It's really hard work, but it's paying off, and it's amazing, life changing, right? In this case, really beautiful. So, you know, there's support. You don't have to do it alone. Don't have to do it alone. Sometimes you can go to a mentor for help, or you know, certain types of friends, right? Some friends aren't great for helping you with this kind of stuff. Some are wonderful, right? It's hard with when someone's emotionally invested in the outcome with you, right? They care about you as a friend or a partner or whatever, sibling. That can be hard, right? That's a harder situation. Um, But yeah, but you don't have to do it alone, right? Um, any thoughts or questions or pushback on any of that, or what if it resonates with you and what if it doesn't? Um, for me, I think the fear of failure and fear of success, they rear their heads all too often, and I try to figure that out, and then to be like, okay, let me actually defang that. What if I did fail? What would that look like? What would be the repercussions of that? What if I did succeed? What would that look like? How would I want to manage that situation? Um, and I realize, it's not so, first of all, I'm making a lot of assumptions. And second, like, I can handle any of that, right? We learn from failure and from struggle. That's not something to be afraid of, right? And and then I can figure out, okay, if I just need a little get over the hump of that, like, knot in my chest or pit in my stomach, well, let me set a timer, right? And do that and see if I can just get started. 'Cause sometimes all it takes is just getting started. Right? But our resistance can teach us an awful lot about ourselves. And then we can be on the lookout for that in the future, right? We can better anticipate these situations. And that's great because then you can save yourself the time wasted and the angst and anxiety, right? That's unnecessary by knowing, oh, that's the kind of situation where I would in the past have had some resistance. How can I avoid that right now? What can I do about that? And all of a sudden it loses its power, right? It's pretty amazing that way, right? When it's hidden in the darkness, that's when it has its power. Expose it to the light of day and it loses a lot of its power. And that's what we're talking about here today, right? Trying to listen to it and learn from it, being curious about it rather than resisting. Resisting keeps it locked up, but doesn't actually help us, right? Um, I want you to think about um, for this week, probably for the thing you thought about earlier that you've been resisting. What's one small step you could take this week? One small step you could take this week to learn from that resistance and move forward. What's one small thing? Again, if you feel like sharing in the chat, that'd be great, but that's okay if you don't. Right? What's one small thing you could do this week to try to learn from and move forward with the resistance, right? Again, I think it's about a lot of empathy and compassion for ourselves and for other people in these situations, right? Um, you know, a lot of times our inner critic is so tough on us in these situations. And a lot of times it's because we've been pushed really hard for a long time by a lot of people, maybe including ourselves. And maybe it's time for a bit of a different relationship with yourself, you know, healthier one, more compassionate one, one that's more curious and loving towards yourself, right? Beth says, I'm putting tax time on my schedule. I find if I scheduled it and add it to my calendar, it's more likely to get done. That is a great one, Beth. That is a really effective technique. Things that you want to get done. Don't create this like endless to-do list that just overwhelms you. Schedule it. Put it in your calendar as an appointment, like it's a doctor's appointment. And you can't miss it unless you're going to reschedule it in the moment. And you can only reschedule it once, maybe twice, but really once, like just because something came up like a real doctor's appointment. But put it in there. That's great. I'm proud of you for doing that, Beth. So that's a great, great, great suggestion. And then sit down and set the timer. So I'm going to do 5 minutes of my taxes. See how that goes. You could do 5 minutes of anything, right? Um, I hope this helped. Uh, I hope it resonated with you. If it did, and you'd like to support this live content by making a donation, it is most welcome. So thank you in advance for that. I really appreciate the support. I know some of you have made donations in the past, so I'm very grateful for that. I hope you're following me here on Insight Timer. And if not, please do. And you can reach out to me there if you have any questions or want to do some deeper work together. Reach out to me there. You can also find my group here. I have a group on Insight Timer that we're going to try and make uh, a vibrant community of people who are trying to live with integrity and joy in their lives and live a life that is fully aligned with your core values and beliefs and who you want to be as a human being, live authentically. So I hope you'll join that group if you haven't already, and follow me and check out. I've got a mini course that you can take on living with integrity. People seem to like it, so and you can ask questions and we can have a conversation in that course. So I hope you'll do that. And then I've got a bunch of meditations up here and more to come. So I hope you'll check those out and leave a rating and review. And let me know in the review if there are any topics or types of meditations you'd like me to include in the future. Please let me know that. And then uh, I do these live sessions um, mostly on Wednesdays. This time Wednesdays at noon Eastern. My next one is next week on Wednesday on finding solid ground when everything's changing. We live in a society right now, it feels like everything's changing around us almost every day, right? War in the Middle East, AI, the economy, political polarization, right? And then our own lives, jobs, relationships, health, whatever. How do you find solid ground when everything feels like it's moving and shifting? And how do you build a life when it's surrounded by so much uncertainty, right? So we'll explore that next week. I hope you sign up for that and join me for that. Um, I deeply appreciate you being here today. I really love having this community here on Insight Timer. And again, I hope you'll follow me and join my group or community here on Insight Timer, and that you'll come back next week as well and let me know if you have any questions or want to dig deeper into something. But in the meantime, thank you so much. Sending a lot of love and gratitude to you all. I hope you have a spectacular rest of your day wherever you are. I'm just outside of Boston. It's a little hazy, but warmer than it was a couple of weeks ago. So I'm very grateful for that. The snow is melting, almost gone, and um, spring is in the air. So I'm very grateful for that and for all of you. Thank you so much. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye.